Hey guys, hopefully you got through the vocab as you came in today. Even though I'm not here with you, wanted to be able to do some notes and keep moving forward with the chapter. Fun facts, it's technically Friday now, and this is my second time trying this. Went all the way through, got everything perfect, and for whatever reason, the microphone wasn't on, and so it's just me waving my hands around and the notes. And so you didn't actually get to hear me teaching. And I'm really hoping that it picks up my voice this time, because if not, you're just gonna get this video, or maybe even the first one, just me gyrating without any sound. So where we're starting, you're gonna have to write all this down. You should have gotten some notes. I decided to give you the rest of them. However, this one's not included. So this one will need to go on notebook paper like the other ones we were doing. But after this one, it should go relatively faster after that. So looking at the two forms of immigration, anytime we're talking about migration, immigration, we're moving from one area to another. So it says a population may grow if individuals move into the range from elsewhere. Population may shrink if they move from the range to another one. But the difference between the two is that immigration with an I is going to be when individuals move into a geographic range. Immigration with an E is going to be when individuals move out of the geographic range. And so they're both dealing with moving from one area to another. But the easy way to remember this is that immigration with an I is going to be moving in to an area, and immigration with an E is going to be moving out, or you could say it is exiting from that area. Regardless whether it's moving in or moving out, it can happen for a variety of reasons, including competition, limited resources, overcrowding, predation, stress. Any number of factors could influence an organism's decision to move from one area to the next. And so I know that that was a good bit to jot down. So if you need to, you can pause at any point throughout this, because I'm going to just kind of be rolling through it. If you're like, wait, I didn't get it, you can always hit pause and then get it down and then keep going after that. But for awkwardness and recording time, I'm just going to keep rolling through it so that I'm not just sitting here pretending to stare at you through a camera. So anyways, so that has to do with immigration. Picking up where your packet starts. So at this point, we can see that immigration with an E is going to show the the difference between moving out of a population and immigration with an I moving in to population number 2. So we see we are leaving immigration with an E, population 1, immigration with an I moving in to population 2 down below here. So that shows you the difference. Not a lot of notes to take there. All right, let's talk about exponential growth. Under ideal circumstances or ideal conditions with unlimited resources, a population is going to grow exponentially. It's just going to continue to grow and get larger and larger without ever stopping. But that's under the perfect ideal conditions. And so we know that that's not always the case, but hypothetically speaking, and even for a short time in reality, this does happen a little bit. And so the larger a population gets, the faster it grows. Think about it. If we had 2 rabbits and we decided to have them breed, and let's say they produce 3 offspring. Let's say each of those 3 offspring produce 3 more offspring. And then their offspring produce 3 more and 3 more and 3 more. Each time we're multiplying times 3, it's not just adding up in a linear fashion, but we're moving up in this J-shaped curve on a graph where we're seeing this growth rise faster and faster. Different from organism to organism in terms of how much time it takes and how long this process happens. Bacteria could be a matter of minutes to hours. Larger elephants could I said elephants organisms, I'm thinking elephants in my mind, could take years to grow exponentially. Humans could take years to grow exponentially, just due to the way we reproduce and the time it takes and things like that. Take longer, and so it can still happen. It's just the time frame is going to be different. All right, so here we see exponential. You can see that J-shaped curve there. It's not perfect, but I'm hoping you don't write your J's like that. But you can see represented for test sake and for memory, easy to remember J-shaped exponential curve. Moving on to logistic growth. This is much more realistic in nature. This is going to be what happens when a population growth, goes up exponentially, and then it starts to slow down and eventually it'll stop. There's 3 phases, and I know this is a lot to write, and I'm having you write all of it, but I've given you 2 separate slides. There's not actually 2 separate slides, but you can use both of those to fill in for this information. So phase 1, exponential growth, the exact same thing we were just talking about here is the beginning of this. And so we're going to grow with unlimited resources and things are going to be great. But as we begin to grow, those resources become a little less unlimited or abundant. And so that moves us into phase 2, and growth is going to slow down. It doesn't continue for long. The population size doesn't necessarily decrease, but the rate of growth is going to slow down from what it was. And so we're not in that J-shaped fashion anymore. We're going to have that J shape, and it's going to have a little bit of a hook on it. And then phase 3, the growth stops. Once again, growth stopping does not mean that we're decreasing, but it just means that it's leveled off. We're no longer continuing to rise or to grow in size anymore. So the rate of the population growth drops to 0. And so the population could level off and stay at this level. It could decrease, doesn't have to stay the same. But either way, we're no longer gaining size. So there's no influx of immigration, no influx of births, and growth is going to level out. What causes this to happen is what's known as carrying capacity. It's down here near the bottom. It's this maximum number of individuals of a particular species a environment can support. And so we've talked about range and density and distribution. And so when we combine those 3 things, we think about the size of the range of the space, the number of organisms, how they're clumped or spread out, etc. That helps play a part in how many organisms can fit in one given area. And so logistic growth is going to be more of an S-shaped curve. You'll see that in a second. If you need to go back, if you need to pause here and then go forward, you can do that at any point. Remember, just hit pause and then keep going. So we see the S-shaped curve. We have that phase 1, which is that exponential growth. Then phase 2, we round off. Phase 3 is going to level out and be flat. And so that carrying capacity is any number of limiting factors that are going to help level off how many organisms that an environment can support. And so at this point, I think that's all of section 1. And so at this point, if you will look to the board there, I think it's page 135, 1 through 5. If you haven't finished that, we started that last time when I was with you. And so we finished the notes now. You should be able to fully answer every question 1 through 5. Don't think too hard about them, but try your best to answer them. And you can pause here, do that. Once you've finished, turn it into the basket, and then you can come back. We'll start the second section of notes. I'm going to keep rolling through it. You can pause here, and when you get ready, you can start again. All right, so limiting factors, moving into section 2. These are going to be the factors that control the growth of a population. Not necessarily influencing the growth itself, but they kind of prevent growth from happening. And so it's the same things we've been talking about since chapters 3 and 4. Now we're seeing again in 5. Competition, predation, parasitism, disease, natural disasters. You throw stress in there as well. All of these can act separately or independently, but they can also compound and affect a population. But all of these are going to work together to determine that carrying capacity of an environment for a species. So looking at the first ones, density dependent limiting factors. These are factors that are dependent upon a population's density being clumped together. And so the more clumped an area or the more crowded an area or a group is, the stronger effect these factors have on the group. Didn't read them all. We're going to go through them. They're going to be at the top right there. Anyways, competition, same, different chapter, same story, or same story, different chapter. When populations become crowded, they compete for resources. We know that there's a finite number of resources. And if you think back to chapter 4, the competitive exclusion principle tells us that no two organisms can live or can occupy the same niche in the same habitat at the same time, because one's going to be naturally excluded and it'll miss out. And so in competing for resources, some organisms may not gather enough to survive long term. They might be unable to reproduce. And there's a strong chance they could die of starvation if they're unable to find food resources in the area if they're having to compete. And so if that's the case, chances are they might experience immigration. They might try to stay and fight it out. Who knows? Regardless, they have two options. They can migrate or they can fight until the death there. Who knows? Maybe they'll pull it through. And so this leads to lower birth rates and higher death rates, not only because of organisms dying, but the stress placed on organisms for survival takes away from, I guess, the energy and the ability to reproduce at times, because you're so focused on keeping yourself alive that you're not thinking about the group size. And so this is dependent upon individuals competing in one given area for the same resource before it's used up. I mean, this happens both in nature, it happens in school. I'm sure you saw some people run into lunch trying to get to the front of the line to get food or whatever. I don't know. It happens every day. And so a couple of different reasons this can happen. It can happen over food, space, or mating. And so if we were to watch a nature video and you saw two organisms fighting, chances are it's going to be over one of those three different things, whether it's food, territorial invasion or space, or trying to attract a mate for reproduction. There are several mating rituals that are kind of violent at times. But those will be primarily one of the three reasons you see two organisms competing in a given area. All right, predation and herbivory. I'm going to sum this up a little bit differently. I'm not going to really kind of go through the slide here. They both fluctuate population density and size in this kind of dynamic circle. So whether it's a herbivore and a plant, predator prey in terms of animal to animal, I'm going to give you an analogy and then I'll help make this paragraph here make a little bit more sense. And so this says one organism becomes abundant until preyed upon, and the population drops as a result. Then the predator population and the prey population rise again. And the predator population drops and the prey population rises again over and over. And so it's this cycle of one will rise, the other rise, one drops, and this is up, down, this cycle. And so if we introduced an abundance of mice to French camp and then introduced a couple of cats, the cats would have an abundance of resource and feeding on the mice. And so the cat population would then begin to grow. As the cat population grew, they would feed on more and more mice, which would then cause the mice population to shrink. As the mice population shrunk, the cat population would begin to shrink because the cats are either having to leave the population to go find new food resources, or they're dying off because there's not enough food available. And so as the cat population then shrinks, the mice population grows again. And as this grows, the cats grow. And as the cats grow, the mice shrink. And it makes this circle that is dynamic, that's always fluctuating or changing over time within a ecosystem. Humans also play an important part because we tend to kill organisms pretty fast, not always for food, sometimes for sport. Not the only organisms that do that, but it happens. So parasitism and disease. This is going to affect density dependent groups as well. Parasites and disease causing organisms feed at the expense of their host, weakening them, often causing death or disease. If you think about illness or parasites in nature, they are going to easily move from host to host if you have a dense group. The more dense a population, the easier it is for parasites to jump from host to host, the easier it is to spread disease in crowded areas. And so think about getting sick with something and then going into, well, be it a pep rally, school, and classroom, maybe you go to a concert. It's going to be much easier for that virus or that bacteria or that microscopic worm or whatever to move from host to host when you're in close proximity with something else. And so that's where that whole idea of social distancing came back in 2020 and this year as well. Is that with different viruses and things, that if you separate, the idea is that the separation, then if you take away the dense population, if it's more sparse, it would help control the level of spread in crowded areas. Because these two things, parasitism and disease, are density dependent. And so if there's not a dense population, if it's spread out, then usually those parasites or single cell organism, virus, bacteria, whatever, tend to die off with what the last host that they infect. Not that the host will die off, but that either the host body will beat the virus or whatever. I mean, it could essentially die off with the host organism, but not always. And so that's where that whole idea of spreading out, it defeats the idea of a dense group coming together. Stress from overcrowding. Some species are going to fight among themselves if it becomes overcrowded, which can lead to stress. I would try to simulate this and have everybody get together in one small tight area. And you could tell who it really bothered, like we're really stressed out by being overcrowded, which then creates stress, which in high levels can weaken the body's ability to defend itself or fight off infection and disease. Stress can also slow reproduction and birth rates, which then harms the size of the population. And it can lead to the killing off of the young and the weak. And so if there are too many organisms, the young and the weak being the ones that aren't the, naturally selected or the most fit or for survival, those are the easiest to pick off to then lower your numbers so that you're not overcrowded anymore. So this can be a density dependent limiting factor as well. So the size of a population for a given area determines how much stress is present and if the population will grow, decline, or stay the same. And so that geographic range we talked about in section 1, and then how dense the population is, how many individuals are present, and then the way that they're spread out will all affect this as well. All right, this is the last one we're doing today. Density independent limiting factors are going to move through an area and they're going to affect all populations in similar ways, regardless if you've got a large clumped up group or if you've got one that's spread out over a large geographic range. And so usually different kinds of weather, natural disasters, hurricanes, droughts, floods, wildfires, you can throw tornadoes in there, earthquakes, volcano eruptions, who knows? But they're going to act as density independent limiting factors. I don't know if you've seen I think it's the second Jurassic World where they're running down the side of the mountain and the volcano's erupting and it's coming through and the lava's coming and it's wiping out everything, all the plant life. Dinosaurs are like falling and dying left and right. But that had nothing to do with density. It was moving through the island at a steady rate, but it was affecting all plant and animal life regardless of density there because it was so widespread. And then that kind of goes back to primary and secondary succession. We see that this can cause a population to crash or decline. Population may rebuild quickly and steadily population may rebuild quickly or steadily increase over time. And so the population that rebuilds quickly is going to experience that secondary succession we talked about in chapter 4. Steady increase over time is going to be primary succession. So quick rebuild, secondary, steady over time, primary. And so this goes back to that and how the ecosystems are affected and then how the populations come back even after a large natural disaster. Sometimes it's hard to test true density independence because of the way that organisms like to clump together. Sometimes a density independent factor will present itself as a density dependent because of the way those organisms were clumped instead of that density independent. So that is, I think, all I've got for you today. If you have any questions, make sure that you write those down. At this point, I'm sure you've had some questions that you want to ask or need something you need to clarify on. If you write that down or mark that, highlight that, I will try to answer that when I get back on Tuesday. And so at this time, I think there's more questions on the board. I think it's page 141, 1 through 3. It's a 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B set up there. But if you'll answer those, that homework will be due on Tuesday, and I will see you then. If you need to go back and rewatch anything, go for it. If you need to write down a question, make sure you do that, and then get the classwork done. So hopefully you enjoy your weekend, and I will see you Tuesday. Maybe.